Tonight the wind whispers of an age-long past, a time when the great rivers froze solid, when the prairies shimmered white under a merciless sky, and when homes across America flickered faintly against the cold that seemed to devour the very air. It was the winter of 1899. A cold snap so fierce that it etched its memory into the bones of a nation. This was the Great Arctic Outbreak, also known as the Great Blizzard of 1899, a meteorological event of staggering proportions. Massive high-minus pressure system, born in the Canadian Arctic, plunged southward, shattering records from the Dakotas to the Gulf. Towns were buried, trains stalled in drifts taller than men, and even the Gulf of Mexico felt the breath of ice. Temperatures fell below zero in every state of the Union, a feat never repeated. Before we begin this journey back in time to the frostbitten fields and snow-choked streets of that fateful February night, take a moment to get comfortable. If you're watching from the United States, perhaps it's evening, the light dimming softly beyond your window. To those in Europe, maybe it's already night and you're ready to drift off to sleep. And to our friends in Canada or anywhere else across this wide, wonderful world, what time is it where you are? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story we share. Now, take a deep breath. Let the quiet of the night settle around you. The story is about to begin. It began not with a storm, but with a silence in the small town of Cairo, Illinois. Dusk fell early in that February evening. Sun sank behind the Mississippi, leaving behind a pale wash of gold that faded quickly to gray. The townspeople had heard the rumors, telegraph lines buzzing with talk of cold sweeping down from the Canadian plains, but few believed it could reach them with such vengeance. Winter had been long, yes, but not cruel, not yet. By nightfall, the first wind arrived. It carried a strange weight, sharp as needles, smelling faintly of ice and pine. Horses shifted uneasily in their stalls, and the lanterns on Main Street flickered in protest. Then, as if the sky itself exhaled, the temperature dropped. Thermometers fell faster than the townsfolk could measure, until the glass nearly cracked from the strain. Mrs. Turner, who ran the boarding house near the railroad, wrapped herself in 3 shawls and watched frost creep up the inside of her windows. Beyond them, the street lamps were dim halos in a mist of glittering snow. Her breath plumed in the air like smoke. Across the street, the old telegraph office went dark, its lines stiff and brittle, snapping one by one under the weight of ice. By midnight, even the river had begun to seethe. A thin skin of ice spread across its surface, whispering softly as it thickened in the moonlight. No one slept soundly that night. Doors rattled in their frames. Timmies howled, and the wind outside sang the long, lonely song of the north. The great Arctic outbreak had arrived at Cairo's doorstep. When dawn came, it brought no warmth. The sky was pale, stretched thin as parchment, and the light that fell upon the town carried no comfort. It was a brittle, colorless light, as if even the sun had frozen. Smoke rose sluggishly from chimneys, curling sideways in the stiff wind before disappearing entirely. The town looked smaller beneath that strange sky, its edges softened by snow and silence. The first to stir were the railroad men, bundled in coats so heavy they could barely move. Their breath fogged around their faces as they trudged toward the yard, boots crunching through a crust of ice that had formed overnight. The rails gleamed with frost, metal groaning as it contracted in the cold. They tried to light the signal lamps, but the oil had thickened like syrup, refusing to catch flame. Even the tools they held burned their fingers through the leather of their gloves. At Mrs. Turner's boarding house, the pipes had frozen solid. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the pump handle that refused to move. Her breath came out in visible clouds as she broke the thin ice that had formed in the basin overnight. Upstairs, her guests huddled beneath layers of quilt, too cold to speak, their dreams full of cracking wood and whistling wind. Somewhere a pane of glass gave way with a muffled snap, and snow began to drift in through the frame. Across town, children pressed their faces against the frosted windows of the schoolhouse, watching their own reflections blur in the glass. The teacher, Miss Carter, held her hands close to the tiny stove at the front of the room, coaxing what little warmth she could from its dull orange glow. The coals inside hissed faintly, protesting the cold that crept even into the iron. He smiled bravely at the children, though her lips were pale and trembling. Outside, the Mississippi had turned to a wide, silent plain of white, as sheets stretched from shore to shore, glittering faintly beneath the weak sun. Men walked out cautiously onto its surface, stamping their feet in disbelief. Some laughed, others prayed. None had seen the river stop like this before. It was a phenomenon reported from street Louis to New Orleans, as the unprecedented cold gripped the continent's mighty artery. The whole world seemed to hold its breath that morning. By midday, the cold had become something more than weather. It was a living thing, moving through the streets with a quiet, relentless purpose. The snow no longer fell in soft flakes, but in dry, stinging grains that rattled against windows like sand. Horses refused to pull their loads, their nostrils crusted with frost, their breath hanging like ghosts in the air. Wagons sat abandoned in the road, wheels locked in place by ice. At the edge of town, the mail train from street Louis had been due before sunrise, and never came. Somewhere along the line, engines had frozen, their boilers unable to build pressure, a common fate for the thousands of locomotives stranded across the national network. The telegraph lines, those slender lifelines connecting the heart of the nation, hung motionless and dead, draped in icy threads that shimmered faintly in the weak daylight. Harris postmaster Mr. Avery stood outside the depot, staring down the empty tracks as though he might will the train into view. His beard was white with frost, and his coat crackled when he moved. Inside the station, a small fire sputtered in the potbelly stove. Travelers waiting for connecting trains huddled together for warmth, sharing coffee that had gone lukewarm in its tin pot. A man from Kansas muttered that he'd never known such cold, not even in the blizzards of his youth. Another swore he'd seen birds frozen in mid-minus flight that morning, their wings caught mid-minus beat as they fell from the sky like dark petals. No one's gossip tales were coming from everywhere. Out on Main Street, shopkeepers swept at their doorways with little success. The snow seemed to return as soon as it was cleared, swirling in narrow eddies that snuck into every crack and crevice. The general store ran out of coal by noon, and when a shipment failed to arrive from the next town over, men began breaking apart old furniture to burn. The smell of scorched varnish drifted faintly through the air, a bitter, desperate scent. And yet, amid the stillness, there was beauty. The trees stood like crystal monuments, each branch sheathed in glass. Fences sparkled in the dim light, and the sound of distant ice cracking on the river echoed like gunfire across the plains. It was as though the entire world had been transformed into a cathedral of ice and silence. Sis Turner, watching from her window, whispered to herself, "It's as if the earth forgot how to breathe." By the second day, the Mississippi no longer moved at all. What had once been a restless, roaring artery of trade and travel now lay motionless beneath a thick armor of ice. The steamboats moored along the bank sat trapped, their hulls groaning in protest as the water beneath them expanded and froze solid. Men walked out cautiously, testing the surface with poles and axes, their breath shortened visible in the crystalline air. Captain Elijah Brooks, a riverman for 30 years, had never seen such stillness. He stood aboard his vessel, the Silver Bell, wrapped in a greatcoat stiff with frost. The paddle wheel, half-minus submerged in the ice, looked like a sculpture, something carved and abandoned by gods. He reached down, rapping his gloved knuckles against the frozen water, and felt the dull, unyielding thud. "She's dead," he muttered, meaning the river. "The river's gone to sleep." Down along the banks, townsfolk gathered, marveling and murmuring. Children chased each other across the wide expanse, their laughter carried away by the wind until their mothers called them back sharply, fearful the ice might crack. A wagon tried to cross where the river was widest, its wheels creaking in protest, but halfway through, one of the axles snapped. The horse reared and screamed, its voice echoing in the still air. Hen rushed to help, but every sound seemed swallowed by the cold, distant and hollow. Farther south, even the great delta felt the touch of winter's hand. In New Orleans, orange groves turned gray overnight, their fruit bursting under the sudden freeze. Pipes shattered, fountains froze solid, and the streets that once shimmered with music and color now glistened with frost. The papers would later call it the Great Arctic Invasion, but for those who lived it, the name was too small to tame. It was not just cold, it was a silence. A silencing of everything that moved, everything that breathed. As night drew near again, Captain Brooks' little lantern and hung it from the bow of his ship. The glow spread faintly across the ice, a single warm pulse in a world of white. He stood there long into the night, listening to the faint groans and pops of the frozen river, like the earth itself shifting uneasily in its sleep. The cold deepened, pressing in through walls and under their frames like an invisible tide. Inside Mrs. Turner's boarding house, every fire burned low. Despite their best efforts, coal was running scarce, and even the woodpile in the yard was nearly gone, the logs coated in a slick crust of ice that made them difficult to split. Each strike of the axe sent shards flying into the air, ringing like glass. Mrs. Turner moved from room to room with a lantern, checking on her guests. In the front room, old Mr. Dwyer sat hunched near the stove, wrapped in a blanket that barely reached his knees. His hand shook as he held a tin mug of broth, thin but warm. Upstairs, a young couple from street Lewis slept close together, their breath visible in the cold, their cheeks flushed pink from the chill. Even the cat, a great creature named Millie, had taken to curling up in the oven compartment of the stove whenever it cooled, her eyes glinting like embers in the dim light. The windows wept frost. Curtains stiffened where moisture had frozen into them. Every step across the wooden floor creaked with a brittle sound, as though the house itself were aging a century with each passing hour. Still, there was comfort in small things. A pot of tea brewed with melted snow, the quiet crackle of kindling catching flame, the faint hum of a hymn that Mrs. Turner sang under her breath. Outside, the world glowed blue and silver under the moonlight. Snow drifted against the doors, sealing them like tombs. The distant whistle of a stranded train echoed faintly from across the river, haunting and far away. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves had begun to move closer to town, their tracks threading through the snow where the forest met the open road. And yet, for all its harshness, the night had a strange beauty. The stars above were sharper, clearer than anyone could remember, each one burning steady and bright against the dark. Mrs. Turner paused by the window, lantern in hand, and gazed up at them. Perhaps, she whispered, the cold brings us closer to heaven. The lantern flickered, and for a moment the entire room was still. No sound, no movement, only the hum of wind against the eaves. Then she turned, tucked her shawl closer around her shoulders, and carried the light onward through the sleeping house. Down the street from the boarding house, the telegraph office stood in a shroud of silence. The once lively building, usually filled with the steady clicking of keys and the hum of wires, had gone utterly still. The lines outside, draped in thick sleeves of ice, sagged toward the ground like weary arms. Each gust of wind made them tremble faintly, producing a soft musical chime that faded into the distance. Sighed, Walter Finch, the town's telegraph operator, sat wrapped in his overcoat, staring at the silent machine before him. He had been at his post since dawn, tapping the key every hour in hope of a reply. But the wires gave nothing back. The storm had cut them off completely, part of a national communications blackout that left cities isolated. No word from Strait Louis, no word from the capital, nothing but the low moan of the wind outside. For the first time in years, Cairo was an island of isolation in a sea of frozen silence. Walter's fingers were numb. He rubbed them together, then held them over the small coal stove in the corner, but the flame inside had dwindled to a weak orange glow. The whole bucket was nearly empty, and the last delivery had not come. He looked at the framed photo on his desk, a woman and 2 children in winter coats smiling despite the cold. They were in Cincinnati, hundreds of miles away. He wondered if the cold had reached them yet. He wondered if they were safe. At midday, a knock came at the door. It was young Henry Porter, one of the railway boys, his face red from the wind. "Mr. Finch," he stammered. "There's talk the bridge might freeze solid. The engineers can't get through." Walter nodded, though the boy's words barely registered. The idea of the great bridge locked in ice struck him as both terrifying and strangely ominous inspiring. After the boy left, Walter sat again, listening to the emptiness on the line. Out of habit, he tapped out a message, just 3 words. "Is anyone there?" The key clicked sharply in the stillness, echoing against the walls. There was no answer, only the faint creak of the building settling, and the distant cry of the wind between the wires. As evening fell, he stood and walked to the door. Outside, the sky had turned the color of lead, and snow was falling once more, thin, dry flakes that whispered as they touched the earth. He tilted his head, listening. For a moment, he imagined he could hear a faint reply far off in the static of the storm, a rhythm, a pulse, something alive. But when he strained to catch it again, there was only silence. He closed the door, stoked what remained of the fire, and whispered softly to the empty room, "Well, hold on. Someone will answer soon." By the 3rd morning, the world had gone quiet in a way that unnerved even the most steadfast souls. No roosters crowed, no dogs barked. The snow muffled every footstep, swallowing even the faintest noise. Doors that once slammed now opened with a soft sigh. Voices carried strangely thin and brittle, as though the air itself could no longer hold them. Cairo had become a ghost town wrapped in white. The streets were empty except for the occasional figure moving quickly from one doorway to another, heads down, scarves drawn tight. The cold was no longer just an inconvenience, it was an enemy that stalked the edges of every thought. People spoke of it in whispers as though too loud a word might anger it. At the general store, a few townsfolk gathered, their breaths mingling like smoke. Shelves that once held flour, kerosene, and canned goods were bare now, save for a few tins of beans and some brittle loaves of bread. Mr. Kessler, the storekeeper, kept a ledger open on the counter, but no longer bothered to write down the debts. He knew no one would pay until spring, if spring came at all. The postmaster, Mr. Avery, came in shaking snow from his hat. "No mail," he said simply, his voice cracking with the cold. Not a word from the south, the east, or the west. Nothing's moving. The others nodded grimly. They had all heard the same stories, carried by the last travelers before the silence fell, the Ohio frozen solid, the Great Lakes locked tight, cattle dying by the thousands on the plains. It was as though the entire continent had been wrapped in an icy hand. From the rafters above, a single icicle hung, long as a man's arm. It dripped slowly, one bead at a time, into a tin bucket on the floor. The sound, plink, 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 was the only thing that broke the stillness. Near noon, the church bell rang once. Its tone was muffled, barely reaching across the square, and then it stopped, the clapper frozen in place. The pastor, a thin man with gentle eyes, had tried to gather the townsfolk for prayer, but even faith moved slowly in such cold. Still, a handful came. They sat in silence within the dim sanctuary, wrapped in blankets, candles flickering weakly in the drafts. Outside, the snow continued to fall, fine, dry, endless. Was not the kind of storm that shouted, it whispered softly and steadily until every sound of life had been swallowed whole. By evening, the church stood like a monument carved from ice. Its stone walls glittered faintly under the moonlight, and the bell tower, once a proud silhouette against the sky, was now rimmed with frost so thick it looked sculpted from glass. Inside, the last of the candles flickered low, their wax hardened into milky ridges along the pews. The smell of tallow and pine smoke hung faintly in the air, blending with the sharp metallic scent of cold. Reverend Cole had remained behind after the others left, unwilling to let the building fall completely dark. He sat near the altar, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the frozen cross at the front of the sanctuary. The air in the church was so cold that every breath hung visible before his face, rising unfading like unanswered prayers. He had preached through droughts, floods, and sickness before, but never through a silence this profound. From outside, the faint creak of ice expanding along the tower stones echoed downward like the groan of an old ship at sea. The bell itself was frozen in place, a glimmering mass of bronze and frost. More than once he thought about climbing up to strike it by hand, to let the town know they were not alone. Bang. His strength coated in a glossy sheen. Still, he rose and gathered his coat around him. The sound of his boots on the floorboards broke the heavy quiet. He made his way up the spiral staircase, lantern in hand, its light trembling along the curved stone walls. Halfway up, he stopped to rest, listening. Outside, the wind had died again, leaving a stillness so deep he could hear the faint ticking of ice forming along the iron supports above. When he finally reached the top, the bell loomed before him, a great frozen heart of metal shimmering blue in the lamplight. He reached out and touched it. The cold bit instantly through his glove, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he whispered a single word, lost in the still air, remember. He drew back the small mallet he had carried up and struck the side of the bell. The sound that came was strange, muted, hollow, and haunting. It didn't ring so much as sigh, a deep tone that rippled outward across the sleeping town. Windows shuddered faintly. Somewhere down the street, a dog lifted its head. Then all was silent again. Reverend Cole stood for a long moment, listening to the quiet he had broken, the cold settling deeper into his bones. Finally, he turned and descended, his lantern swaying like a small, defiant star in the dark stairwell. That night, the temperature fell even lower, down past anything old thermometers could measure. The air itself seemed brittle, ready to shatter with the smallest sound. Along the Mississippi, a stillness stretched from shore to shore, the ice so thick it could bear the weight of wagons, even horses. And yet, beneath that silent crust, the river still lived, a slow, shifting power, restless in its frozen prison. Just before dawn, the first crack came. It began as a whisper, a faint groan deep within the ice, so low that only the night creatures stirred. Then, like a breath held too long, it burst. A deep, echoing boom rolled through the valley, rattling the windows of every house along the bank. It was not a sound of destruction, but of warning. The old river, reminding the world that it still moved, still breathed beneath the weight of winter. Captain Elijah Brooks heard it from his berth aboard the Silver Bell. He woke with a start, lanterns swinging above his head, frost falling from the ceiling like fine dust. For a moment he lay still, listening to the groaning song of the ice. Then he rose, wrapped in his heavy coat, and went topside. The stars had faded, and the eastern sky glowed faintly gray. All around him, the river stretched like a plain of marble. He crouched and placed a hand against the ice. It was alive, trembling ever so slightly beneath his palm. He smiled to himself. "He's not dead after all," he whispered. "Just resting." On the far shore, a line of smoke rose from a cluster of shacks, fishermen's homes. Even through the cold, a faint smell of wood smoke carried across the frozen distance. Somewhere a dog barked, its voice small against the vastness of the morning. By sunrise, the town was awake, drawn by the sound of the cracking ice. Men gathered along the riverbank, their breath misting in the cold air. Some brought axes and ropes, others just curiosity. Children pressed close to their fathers, eyes wide at the sight of fissures crawling like veins across the gleaming surface. The sound came again, deep, rolling, ancient, like the earth itself exhaling. And then, as quickly as it had begun, silence returned. The cracks froze again, locking in place, and then stood for a while, waiting for more, but the river held its peace. Oh, oh, oh. The echo of that sound remained, carried on the cold wind through the empty streets. Later, in the quiet of her kitchen, Mrs. Turner would swear she felt the floorboards tremble at that exact moment, as though the river's heartbeat had reached her home. Beyond the town, the farmland stretched like patchwork beneath the white. Fields that had once been alive with winter wheat now lay buried. Fences vanished beneath drifts taller than a man. The barns groaned under the weight of ice and snow, their timbers straining, as if they too feared the cold. Smoke rose faintly from a few chimneys, but it was thin and wavering, easily swallowed by the wind. On one such farm, the Miller family huddled together in the main room. Father, mother, and 3 children sat close to the hearth, which burned small pieces of pine and scraps of coal. Their faces were pale, lips cracked, but their eyes held a quiet determination. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, lifting dry snow into twisting shapes that scuttled along the walls like spirits. The children, young Anna and Samuel, pressed their noses against the window pane, mesmerized by the frost patterns creeping across the glass. Each swirl of white looked like a frozen river, a tiny reminder that the world beyond the walls was alive, though inhospitable. Their older brother Peter helped their father check on the animals. The horses stood quietly in their stalls, breath puffing like smoke, while the cows huddled together, trembling under their thick coats. Despite the cold, life persisted. Father carried buckets of water from the creek, breaking the ice carefully, piece by piece. Salt wood for the fire, her movements methodical and rhythmic. Each swing a small victory over the biting chill. Every task was a reminder that warmth was earned, not given. As night fell, the family gathered again near the fire. The glow painted the room in softer inges and gold, saw a small oasis of life within the vast frozen world. The wind outside softened to a whisper, carrying the distant, eerie sound of the river's frozen expanse. It was a sound that reminded them how small they were, yet also how connected they were to each other, to the land, and to the enduring rhythm of survival. Anna, eyes heavy with sleep, leaned against her mother. "Will it always be this cold?" she whispered. Her mother stroked her hair, voice soft but steady. "No, little one. The sun will come back. It always does." For now, though, they rested in the glow of the hearth, listening to the wind, feeling the deep, solemn quiet of a world held in ice. As the 4th night of the cold snap descended, Cairo's streets took on an otherworldly glow. Lanterns swayed in the wind, their light refracted through icy crystals that had formed along the glass panes. The snow reflected the glow in soft, muted waves, casting long shadows across shuttered windows and frozen doorways. The town moved slowly, if at all, each person wrapped tightly in layers, every footstep a careful negotiation with the icy streets. Mr. Kessler, the storekeeper, made his rounds, checking for stray travelers who might need shelter. His breath left clouds in the frigid air, and each exhale was visible long after it left his lips. A stray dog followed him silently, its paws slipping occasionally on the hard crust of snow. Shop doors were propped open just enough to admit warmth, though the air that escaped from inside quickly froze against the thresholds, creating delicate filigree patterns on the wood. Turner lit every lantern she could spare and placed them along the boardwalk outside her boarding house. The light pooled softly in the snow, creating small islands of warmth in a sea of white. Guests moved quietly along the path, nodding to neighbors with soft smiles, their voices subdued by both politeness and the cold that seemed to steal the strength from their throats. Up on the rooftops, icicles hung heavy, some sharp enough to glint like knives in the moonlight. A lone cat padded carefully along a ridge, tail low, ears flicking to every whisper of the wind. Even the old church tower, now completely rimmed in frost, seemed to hold its breath, a sentinel watching over the frozen town below. Inside the homes, the quiet was both a balm and a burden. Families huddled around small fires, sharing stories in hushed tones, a few read by candlelight, the flames flickering in rhythm with the wind. The cold pressed against the walls, but inside each room a different warmth existed, one not measured by fire, but by the simple act of being together. Outside, the wind carried the faint, mournful cry of the Mississippi far across the snow, a reminder of the life beneath the ice, of the river that slept but had not died. And so, wrapped in blankets and soft coats, the town settled into the rhythm of the night, the long cold night of 1899, each soul finding comfort in their own small, flickering light. Beyond the town, the fields stretched endlessly, coated in a thick layer of snow and ice. What had once been the soft brown of winter soil was now a crystalline plain, sparkling faintly under the pale winter sun. The fences, half-minus buried, jutted through the snow like skeletal reminders of the farms that lay beneath their posts slick with frost. On one small homestead, the Thompson family worked quietly to feed the animals. The horses pawed at the frozen ground, their breath steaming in the air, while cows clustered together, their sides pressed against each other for warmth. Father Thompson carried buckets of water, breaking through the icy crust of the well with careful, measured strikes. Each splash was muffled, the ice forming instantly again, as if the very water had forgotten its own nature. The children, bundled in layers of wool and fur, helped where they could. Little Emily pressed her mittened net hands against the frozen fence rails, feeling the cold bite through to her fingertips. She marveled at the frost patterns, each swirl a miniature world of frozen art. Her brother Jacob trudged through the snow, leaving footprints that quickly vanished under the relentless fall of dry, powdery flakes. Even the wind seemed alive, sweeping across the plains in long, low whispers, carried the faint scent of pine from the distant woods and the sharper tang of frozen earth, biting at cheeks and ears alike. The sky was a pale wash of gray, a canvas against which the snow and ice seemed to glow with a soft, muted light. As night fell, the family returned to the warmth of their small farmhouse. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending long shadows dancing across the walls. As outside, the frozen fields glimmered under the moonlight, stretching into the distance as if the world itself had been transformed into glass. In the quiet of the night, with only the soft murmur of the wind and the occasional crack of distant ice, the Thompsons found a fragile peace, a sense of life continuing, even when the earth seemed frozen in time. By the fifth evening, the sky above Cairo had taken on a strange, heavy hue. It was not quite night, not quite day, but a deep smoky gray that pressed down upon the town like a low ceiling. Stars were hidden, swallowed by the thick, cold clouds that stretched across the horizon. The air carried a biting tang, a mixture of ice and smoke from every hearth burning desperately across the streets. The townsfolk moved cautiously. Each step on the crusted snow echoed faintly, a hollow sound that seemed magnified by the unnatural silence of the cold. Even the wind, usually a constant force, had grown slower, more deliberate, wrapping itself around buildings and street corners like a living shadow. Lanterns glowed weakly in the dusk, their light quivering in the still air. Mrs. Turner went door to door in her boarding house, checking on each guest. She found them wrapped in blankets, leaning against one another for warmth, eyes half-minus closed from exhaustion. Outside, the world seemed to have paused. Etched linked along the boardwalk, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet. Icicles hung like delicate daggers from the eaves, catching the dim light in sharp glimmers. Down by the frozen river, Captain Brooks leaned against the railing of the Silver Bell, staring into the gray distance. The ice beneath him was solid, but he could sense the river moving subtly beneath the frozen surface. He knew it would awaken soon enough, cracking and groaning under its own weight. For now, though, there was a deceptive calm, a fragile stillness that seemed to hold the entire world in suspension. In the fields beyond, the snow lay untouched and smooth, a perfect white expanse that glittered faintly as the last light fell. Farmers tended to their livestock as best they could, their movements slow and deliberate, each task a careful negotiation with the cold. The smell of wood smoke drifted across the landscape, mingling with the scent of frozen earth and ice. As night deepened, a soft hush settled over the town. Every sound, even the faintest creak of a roof or the whisper of wind through trees, seemed amplified in the quiet. The people of Cairo wrapped themselves in blankets, lit what fires they could, and listened to the world held frozen around them, a world suspended between night and day, between cold and the fragile warmth of life. Late that night, as the town of Cairo lay huddled in the fragile glow of lanterns and hearth fires, a sound carried across the frozen streets, long, mournful, and far away. A wolf's howl, stretched and wavering, echoed over the plains and the frozen river, a reminder that life persisted even in the harshest of cold. Sis Turner paused in the hallway of her boarding house listening. The howl sent a shiver through her, though not all from the temperature. It spoke of the wilderness beyond the town, of forests and hills where nothing had been softened by human hands. The wind carried it across the snow, and for a moment it seemed as though the sound came closer, threading between buildings and skating along icy rooftops. Outside, the few who dared venture into the cold stopped in their tracks. A man walking to the post office with a lantern tilted it, straining to see through the whiteness. The glow illuminated frost-covered branches and ice-glazed fences, casting long, wavering shadows across the snow. The howl came again, this time joined by a faint chorus from the distance, a pack answering its call in the blackened night. Inside her room, Anna pressed her face against her other's shoulder. "Is it safe?" she whispered, voice trembling. Her other hugged her tighter, warm hands against chilled cheeks. "Yes, little one. It's just the wind and the wild singing," she said, though even she felt a pang of unease. Captain Brooks, on the river, listened to the same sound carried across the frozen expanse. The ice beneath his feet seemed to hum faintly in response, a vibration that ran through the wooden deck of his ship. He marveled at the stark beauty, at the rawness of life that could survive even beneath such relentless cold. The howl faded slowly, retreating into the distance, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against the ears. And in that silence, Cairo breathed, wrapped in blankets and coats, lanterns flickering, fires smoldering, the distant wild reminding every soul that the world was larger, stranger, and more alive than even the coldest winter could still. Morning arrived pale and hesitant, revealing a town transformed. Every window was framed in frost, intricate patterns spreading like delicate lace across the glass. Sunlight, when it appeared, struck the icy filigree and refracted into faint rainbows, brief sparks of color in a world otherwise washed in whitened gray. Inside the homes, the cold was relentless. Even the thickest quilts could only hold the chill at bay, and breath hung visibly in every room. Mrs. Turner moved carefully through the boarding house, drawing curtains where sunlight had filtered in, creating tiny, warm pockets amidst the pervasive cold. Her guests shuffled about, feet heavy, hands tucked into pockets or beneath layers of fabric, faces pale but determined. At the general store, Mr. Kessler wiped frost from the counters, revealing splinters of wood beneath the icy sheen. The shelves were nearly bare, but he offered what he could, rationing supplies with the precision of a man who understood the weight of survival. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed in soft drifts, sculpted by the wind into gentle ridges and hollows. Every sound carried far, boots crunching, doors creaking, a child's cough echoing along the street. In the schoolhouse, the children pressed their faces against the frosted windows, tracing shapes with tiny fingers. Carter, their teacher, kept the stove lit as best she could, coaxing warmth from the meager calls. She spoke softly, telling stories of spring and green fields, of rivers flowing freely and flowers blooming. The children listened, eyes wide, minds weaving hope into the cold reality that pressed in around them. And outside, the Mississippi reflected the muted sky, the ice stretching like a vast, silent mirror. The faint crackle of distant ice shifting reminded all who watched that beneath the frozen surface, life persisted, stubborn and patient. Even in the depth of the cold, the town endured, holding on to warmth, routine, and the fragile pulse of human life. By midday, the sun rose high enough to cast a weak, silvery light across the town, but it carried no heat. Every surface sparkled with frost, and the air seemed to hold itself rigid, as though even the wind had stiffened under the relentless cold. Streets were nearly impassable, the snow packed hard and glazed with ice that reflected the faint light in dazzling shards. Out on Main Street, a few hardy souls moved about with slow, careful steps. Boots crunched rhythmically against the ice, each sound sharp and echoing through the hushed town. A lamplighter walked his route, lantern swinging, fingers red and numb, lighting each lamp in turn. The small flames flickered bravely against the wind, casting trembling shadows across frost-coated walls. At the boarding house, Mrs. Turner prepared a small meal for her guests: thin soup, thick bread, and tea warmed over the dwindling coals. The smell of the food filled the room, mingling with the faint scent of smoke from neighboring chimneys. Children sat close, elbows on knees, watching steam rise from their bowls as they sipped carefully, savoring even the smallest warmth. Beyond the town, the fields lay still under their icy blanket. Horses pawed slowly at the frozen earth, their coats frosted with tiny crystals. Farmers checked fences and barns, moving deliberately, every motion careful against the biting cold. Even small tasks, feeding the animals, breaking ice in the troughs, felt monumental in a world where the very air seemed to resist movement. From the river, a low groan echoed faintly as I shifted beneath the surface. Captain Brooks watched from the deck of the Silver Bell, his coat pulled tight, lantern swaying in his hand. The river remained frozen, yet the subtle movement beneath reminded him that life persisted even when the world appeared still. And so the town pressed on, each person finding small measures of warmth and comfort, holding on to the fragile pulse of life in a frozen world. The day passed quietly, the snow sparkling, the wind whispering, and the cold pressing steadily against every windowpane. As afternoon turned toward evening, thin plumes of smoke began to rise from nearly every chimney in Cairo, curling lazily into the still gray sky. The scent of burning wooden coal mingled with the sharp tang of frost in the air, creating an aroma both bitter and strangely comforting. Mrs. Turner went from room to room, adding scraps of coal to the dwindling fires. The flames flared briefly, sending warmth into the otherwise icy air. Guests huddled closer, sharing blankets and whispered conversation. Some spoke of spring, of melting rivers, of fields that would one day turn green again. Others remained silent, listening to the wind moan outside, the occasional creak of frozen ember, or the faint groan of the Mississippi beneath its icy cover. Along Main Street, shopkeepers propped doors open just enough to let warmth escape, knowing it would not reach far, but hoping to comfort the rare traveler who braved the frozen roads. A stray dog padded along the boardwalk, following the scent of food and smoke, its paws crunching softly on the snow-covered planks. Icicles hanging from eaves sparkled like crystal daggers, reflecting the faint light, hinting at the beauty hidden even in a hardship. On the outskirts of town, the farmers worked quickly to feed their animals before nightfall. Frost-laden breath rose in steady clouds from their mouths as they shoveled high and broke ice in water troughs. Each action was deliberate, careful, as if one wrong movement could lose warmth and strength. Even the smallest success, a horse eating, a cat drinking, felt like a triumph over the merciless cold. As dusk fell, the town was bathed in a soft gray light. The smoke from the chimneys twisted slowly upward, carried on a faint breeze, disappearing into the endless expanse above. The quiet was pervasive, but within it there was a rhythm, a pulse of life that refused to be extinguished. And in that quiet, each resident of Cairo could feel the delicate, enduring warmth of home, a small defiance against the winter that had taken hold of the nation. Night fell like a heavy blanket, thick and quiet, settling over the town of Cairo with a stillness that pressed against every windowpane and doorframe. Lanterns flickered faintly along the streets, casting soft, trembling pools of light across the snow, while shadows stretched long and thin across icy sidewalks. The town seemed to hold its breath, listening to the whisper of wind and the distant groan of the frozen river. Mrs. Turner made her final rounds in the boarding house, checking that fires still burned and that her guests were wrapped warmly in blankets. She paused at each door, listening for any signs of distress, and whispered words of reassurance to those who shivered. Even the cat Millie had found a warm nook near the stove, curling tightly in a ball, ears twitching to every sound. Outside, a few figures walked the streets, performing the nightly duties that the cold would not forgive. Then Mr. Kessler made his way along the boardwalk, ensuring that stray snow did not block doorways, while the lamplighter moved carefully, lighting each lamp with slow, deliberate strokes. The light flickered against frost-covered windows, reflecting and refracting into small, fleeting patterns that danced across the streets. At the river, Captain Brooks stood on the deck of the Silver Bell, lantern in hand, listening to the faint groans and cracks of ice shifting beneath him. The river was silent for the most part, but he could sense its restless energy, the hidden life beneath its frozen surface. He moved slowly along the deck, checking lines and ropes, making sure the vessel remained secure, every motion measured against the biting cold. In homes and barns, The quiet was punctuated only by the occasional cough, the soft shuffle of feet, or the murmur of someone drifting into sleep. Outside, the wind stirred faintly, carrying the distant howl of a wolf across the frozen plains. It was a sound that reminded the town of the world beyond the streets, beyond the fences and rooftops, save vast, untamed wilderness that existed even in the grip of winter. And so Kyra settled into the long cold night, each soul holding on to warmth, each heart steady with the rhythm of endurance. The wind whispered, the snow rested, and the town stood quietly beneath the blackened sky, awaiting the dawn of another frozen day. On the outskirts of town, the orchards lay silent beneath a thick blanket of snow and ice. The trees, stripped bare of leaves, stood like dark sentinels, their branches stiff and sparkling with frost. Each twig bore a delicate coating of ice, turning the orchard into a glittering cathedral of glass, fragile and beautiful against the muted gray sky. The Thompson family tended to what little remained of their fruit stores, moving carefully so as not to break the brittle branches. Father Thompson checked each tree, tapping lightly on the trunks to ensure they had not split under the weight of frozen frost. Mother Thompson wrapped the youngest children in extra layers before sending them inside, their small faces pink from the cold, their breaths visible in long, wavering clouds. Even the animals in the orchard responded to the chill. Chickens huddled beneath low branches, feathers fluffed against the frost, while a lone goat stamped its hooves in the snow, sending tiny sprays of ice into the air. Every movement was measured, deliberate, a quiet dance against the relentless grip of winter. The sky above deepened into soft twilight, and the first stars blinked faintly through the clouds. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a sound like faint bells, the ice trembling ever so slightly in response. It was as though the orchard itself were alive, breathing softly beneath its frozen coat, a silent witness to the perseverance of those who lived nearby. Father Thompson paused for a moment, hand resting against a frost-covered trunk, and breathed deeply. The air was sharp, biting, yet it held a certain purity, a reminder of the world's resilience, even in the harshest cold. Inside the farmhouse, the family huddled near the fire, the soft orange glow painting shadows on the walls, and they whispered thanks for warmth, for life, for the quiet beauty of a frozen orchard. Across the frozen Mississippi, the old iron bridge that connected Cairo to the lands beyond stood like a monument carved from frost. The rails were encased in ice, their surfaces gleaming like polished metal in the dim sunlight. Sickles hung from the beams in long, sharp formations, swaying faintly with the wind. The bridge groaned occasionally, the sound hollow and echoing across the frozen river, a reminder of the weight it bore. Norfolk folk ventured onto it, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, lanterns swinging cautiously. Each step was careful, measured, the ice crunching faintly beneath heavy boots. Some paused midway, peering over the edges to see the frozen river below, sheets of ice stretching like a glass mirror as far as the eye could see. The sound of cracking ice from far downstream carried faintly, distant yet omnipresent, a haunting reminder of the river's hidden life. Captain Brooks made his way across the bridge to inspect the opposite bank. He moved slowly, every footfall deliberate, lantern casting a small circle of warm light in the pale gray world. The river beneath him was frozen solid, yet he could feel its subtle pulse through the iron. He pressed a gloved hand to a railing, sensing the rhythm of life beneath the frozen expanse. Nearby, children dared one another to slide carefully across shallow patches of ice near the bridge's edge, laughter muffled by scarves and coats. Their joy, small and fragile, carried across the silent landscape, a human warmth contrasting with the unyielding cold. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in respect, moving lightly, brushing across the icy surface in soft whispers. As night approached, lanterns whirled along the bridge, casting a delicate glow on the frost-covered iron. The faint gleam reflected in the frozen river below, creating a shimmering path that connected town to wilderness, warmth to cold, life to stillness. And standing there, Captain Brooks and the townsfolk could see that even in the deepest grip of winter, the world held beauty, fragile yet undeniable. That night, the wind returned with a quiet insistence, gliding through the streets of Cairo and across the frozen plains beyond. It was not violent, but persistent, carrying a soft whispering sound that threaded between buildings, around corners, and beneath doors. The snow shifted gently in its wake, forming tiny drifts that moved almost imperceptibly, like a slowed dance choreographed by the cold itself. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Turner paused in the hallway, listening to the wind as it whispered against the windows. She could hear the faint rattling of shutters, the soft scrape of ice along the roof, and the subtle, haunting sigh that the gusts carried from the distant river. She moved carefully, checking the doors, ensuring that each guest was safely tucked beneath blankets and quilts. Even Millie the cat lifted her head at the sound, ears twitching before settling again. Outside, the trees shivered in the wind, their frost-coated branches clinking faintly against one another. In the distance, the frozen river groaned softly, a deep resonance that blended with the wind's quiet song. Captain Brooks, standing atop the silver bell, wrapped his coat tighter and listened. The ice beneath his feet hummed subtly, as if responding to the movement of air above. The townsfolk inside their homes felt the whispering wind differently. To some, it was a reminder of the cold that pressed against them. To others, it was a lullaby, a slow, soothing rhythm that carried the promise of endurance. Even the children, peering through frost-covered windows, imagined the wind as a messenger, weaving tales from the distant hills and forests, stories of survival and quiet wonders. As the night deepened, the wind softened, leaving only a delicate hush. The snow lay smooth again, the streets empty and silent, and the town seemed suspended in a moment between breaths. In that stillness, every flickering flame, every warm hearth, and every quiet heartbeat stood out a testament to life persisting in the frozen embrace of winter. By the early morning of the next day, the rooftops of Cairo were transformed into smooth, glittering slopes, each covered with a delicate layer of frost that caught the first pale light and turned it into faint prisms of color. Chimneys puffed in trails of smoke, twisting and curling into the gray sky before vanishing into the cold air. The town looked almost unreal, as if painted in a single endless sheet of silver and white. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Turner moved quietly from room to room, ensuring that each guest had enough blankets and warm tea. The hearth fire crackled softly, sending faint warmth into the icy air. Guests stirred, stretching and murmuring, their eyes still heavy with sleep, yet brightened by the gentle glow of the fire. The smallest noises, the scrape of a boot on a floorboard, the clink of a teacup, felt amplified in the quiet house. Beyond the streets, rooftops were alive with frost patterns. Sickles hung in long, glimmering strands, catching the faint light and refracting it in tiny dancing sparks. The snow lay in smooth drifts along the ridges, only occasionally disturbed by a bird landing lightly or the faint movement of a cat exploring the edges. Even the wind, which had whispered the night before, now moved in gentle gusts, tracing the contours of each roof and scattering tiny flurries into the air. At the general store, Mr. Kessler swept the frost from the doorstep, careful not to slip on the icy boards. A stray dog lingered nearby, sniffing the frozen air, its fur bristling against the chill. The town moved slowly, each step deliberate, each breath visible in the frigid morning. The frozen river beyond shimmered faintly, a sheet of glass reflecting the pale sky, still and unyielding. And in the quiet of the frosted morning, the people of Cairo went about their small routines, finding comfort in the warmth of hearths, in shared moments, and in the subtle, shimmering beauty of a town held under winter's crystalline spell. By late morning, the streets of Cairo were smooth, glistening white, the snow packed hard in some areas, soft and drifting in others. Footsteps left temporary impressions, quickly swallowed by the wind as it swept along the streets, weaving miniature patterns in the powder. The town moved cautiously, each resident wrapped tightly in layers of wool and fur, lanterns and hats offering small comforts against the biting cold. Children ventured out in pairs, carrying small sleds or dragging wooden toys, their laughter muffled by scarves. Their joy seemed to ripple softly through the streets, touching doors and windows as they passed. Even the smallest sound, boots crunching, the scrape of a sled, was magnified in the quiet, echoing faintly across the frozen square. Shopkeepers kept their doors open just a crack, letting warmth leak into the frigid morning. The smell of bread from ovens and the faint aroma of coal mixed with the icy scent of the town itself. Mr. Kessler moved carefully along his shop's boardwalk, dusting snow from the edges and checking for drifts that might block access. A stray dog trotted beside him, nose close to the ground, tracking scents hidden beneath layers of ice and snow. Along the river, Captain Brooks watched the frozen surface from the deck of the Silver Bell. The ice stretched endlessly, broken only by distant fissures that groaned softly in response to the cold. He adjusted his coat and lantern, feeling the subtle pulse of the river beneath the frozen surface. The quiet was profound yet alive, a rhythm of ice wind and distant water that reminded him the river, though silent, was never truly still. As afternoon approached, the town settled into a measured rhythm. Every footstep, every gesture, every soft sound was amplified in the hush of winter. The snow-covered streets, though harsh and unyielding, held a quiet beauty, reflecting light and carrying whispers of the world beyond, reminding the townsfolk that life persisted even in the deepest grip of winter. In the center of town, the old wells that had once provided water to every household now lay locked in ice. The wooden covers were slick with frost, the buckets frozen in place, and even the metal chains glimmered with a thin layer of frost that caught the weak light. Fetching water had become a careful ritual, each motion measured to avoid injury, each strike of an ice-covered bucket deliberate and precise. Sis Turner wrapped herself in her heaviest coat and stepped outside, lantern in hand, to check the well near her boarding house. The wind was sharp, biting through even her layers, and each breath hung like a cloud in front of her face. He tapped at the frozen cover with a small hammer, listening to the dull, hollow echo that seemed to come from the very heart of the ice. Nearby, a group of children pressed their gloved hands to the frozen surface, leaving small prints in the thin frost coating. They imagined the water beneath as a secret hidden world flowing silently under the frozen crust. That curiosity was tempered by caution, taught carefully by parents who knew that even a misstep could be dangerous in such unyielding cold. The farmers on the outskirts faced the same challenge. Buckets of water for the livestock had to be broken free from the ice, each scoop measured to avoid wasting precious warmth and effort. Even the smallest success, a horse drinking, a bucket filled, felt like a victory over the relentless winter. The frozen wells were both a challenge and a symbol, a reminder that life continued in quiet struggle, that each day demanded careful attention and steady hands. As evening approached, the wells gleamed in the fading light, their icy surfaces reflecting lanterns and stars alike. The townsfolk returned to their homes, carrying water and warmth with them, each step a quiet testament to perseverance. Even in a town gripped by frost, life persisted, measured in small victories in the soft glow of shared effort. By evening, nearly every home in Cairo held a small island of warmth amid the endless cold. Hearth fires crackled softly, sending flickers of light dancing along walls and ceilings. The smell of burning pine and coal filled each room, a comforting contrast to the sharp, icy air pressing against windows and doors. Inside Mrs. Turner's boarding house, the guests gathered around the largest hearth, thick blankets wrapped tightly around their shoulders, and cups of hot tea steaming in their hands. Conversations were hushed, voices low, as though speaking too loudly might anger the winter that pressed in from every direction. Outside, the wind moaned faintly, but inside, the rhythm of the fire offered a gentle, steady heartbeat. Families huddled in their own homes, drawn close by necessity and affection. Children pressed against parents, ears reddened by the cold, faces glowing from warmth. Every motion was slow, deliberate, stirring soup, tending the fire, sharing what little warmth could be spared. The simple act of keeping a flame alive felt monumental in a town held captive by frost. Captain Brooks, on the deck of the Silver Bell, had lit a small stove to fend off the chill that seeped through the wooden deck. The river was silent beneath its frozen sheet, but the faint crackling of the fire reminded him that life persisted even in isolation. Smoke spiraled upward from the stove, disappearing into the night sky, joining the thin plumes rising from the town. As night deepened, the townsfolk felt a quiet comfort in the glow of hearth fires. Each flame was a small triumph over the relentless cold, a reminder that even in hardship, warmth, care, and companionship endured. The world outside remained harsh and unyielding, but within these glowing spaces, life and hope held fast, flickering gently like the flames that warmed every frozen room. Behind the Miller farmhouse, the garden lay beneath a thick layer of snow and ice. Once vibrant with late winter vegetables, it now resembled a glassy plain, every stem and branch coated in frost that glittered faintly under the weak winter sunlight. The soil was hard and unyielding, frozen deep enough that even the smallest shovel could barely break through. Father Miller moved carefully among the rows, inspecting the frozen earth. He tapped lightly on the hard soil with a small spade, listening for cracks, hoping to find even a hint of warmth beneath. The wind swept across the garden, carrying with it the crisp scent of ice and distant pine, brushing against his cheeks and stiffening his fingers. The children watched from the porch, their faces rosy from the cold. Little Samuel pressed his mittens against the frosted railing, tracing tiny patterns in the ice as he imagined what might be hidden below. And it gathered small icicles that had fallen from the roof, holding them up to the light and marveling at the delicate structures. Mother Miller stirred the embers in the fireplace, sending occasional sparks out the chimney that rose into the pale sky, mingling with the frosty air. Even the animals seemed to sense the stillness. Chickens huddled under the low branches of shrubs, while a pair of goats stood side by side, their frosted coats brushing gently against each other. Life persisted quietly in careful rhythms, each being moving with patience and determination. As the day faded into evening, the frozen garden shimmered under the soft glow of the last light. The Millers retreated inside, leaving the frost-covered rows to the quiet of the night, the wind whispering across the icy expanse. And in that silence, they felt a small sense of peace, knowing that even in the harshest cold, life held on, waiting patiently for the warmth that would someday return. Early the next morning, a soft fog rolled in from the river, blanketing Cairo in a gentle gray haze. The world was muted, shapes blurred, and distant buildings seemed to hover between reality and dream. Each breath the townsfolk took was visible, drifting in the chilly air like little clouds that disappeared almost immediately. The fog softened the edges of the streets and rooftops, making the town appear smaller, more intimate. Lanterns glowed through the mist, casting warm, wavering circles of light on the snow-covered paths. Mrs. Turner moved carefully through the fog to light a lantern on the porch, the glow illuminating the frost-laden steps and the tiny drifts that had accumulated overnight. Children ventured out cautiously, boots crunching softly on the snow, eyes wide with wonder at the misty world. Every sound, footsteps, a door opening, a distant cough seemed amplified and then swallowed by the fog, creating a strange, calm rhythm. Even the wind was softened, its whispers gentle against frost-covered shutters. Captain Brooks stood at the edge of the river, watching the fog curl over the frozen surface. The ice beneath remained solid, but the muted shapes of the far shore suggested movement beneath, as though the river itself were holding its breath. The faint groans of shifting ice carried through the mist, haunting and slow, reminding him that beneath the stillness, life and energy persisted. As the day progressed, the fog thickened, softening the town further. The streets were quiet, the world hushed, and the townsfolk moved through the gray haze with deliberate care. Inside their homes, the warmth of fires and the glow of lanterns became even more precious, offering a comforting contrast to the soft, cold gray that enveloped the frozen town. By midday, the fog began to lift, revealing streets lined with deep snowdrifts shaped by the persistent wind. Some drifts were taller than a man, leaning against the walls of houses and barns, while others formed gentle mounds that sparkled like powdered crystal under the pale winter sun. Walking through them required care. Each step was met with resistance, the snow soft in some places, hardened icy in others. Mrs. Turner ventured out with a small broom to clear the entrance to her boarding house. She moved slowly, each sweep deliberate, sending clouds of fine snow into the cold air. The sound of her broom scraping against ice and packs echoed faintly, blending with the occasional crunch of boots or the soft jingle of a lantern. Guests peeked out from windows, watching the gentle labor, comforted by the quiet persistence of care and order. Children still played cautiously along the lanes, their small sleds gliding over hardened patches, while their laughter carried softly through the crisp air. They paused often, pressing gloved hands to frost-laden railings, making small snow angels where the drifts allowed, and marveling at the way the sun caught the crystals, scattering tiny sparks across their rosy faces. Farmers moved among the drifts, breaking paths to feed livestock and check on fences. Each gesture was careful, rhythmic, a slow and deliberate dance against the harshness of winter. The horses pawed at the snow, the cows huddled together for warmth, and the occasional goat stamped gently to shake the frost from its coat. Life persisted in quiet, patient motions, every act an assertion of resilience against the unyielding cold. As evening approached, the lanes glimmered under the faint light, the snow forming soft contours that lead the eye toward distant chimneys, rooftops, and the frozen river beyond. Even in the deep grip of winter, there was a sense of quiet beauty, of life moving steadily, and of hope shimmering faintly across the snow-drift lanes of Cairo. On the outskirts of town, the old grist mill stood frozen, its wooden wheel encased in a thick sheath of ice that glittered in the weak afternoon sun. The river that once powered it had ceased to flow, trapped beneath a solid, shimmering sheet of frost. Inside, the millstones were silent, dusted with a thin layer of powdery snow, and the air smelled faintly of green and cold wood. Mr. Parker, the miller, wrapped in layers of wool and a thick coat, made his way inside, lantern in hand. The floor creaked softly beneath his boots, each step deliberate to avoid slips on the frost-coated boards. He checked the storage bins, noting that the last sacks of flour were dwindling even in the harsh grip of winter. Life had to continue, and he resolved to ration carefully, preserving enough for the town and for his own family. Outside, the wind whispered across the frozen wheel, lifting small puffs of snow and sending them swirling in lazy spirals. The mill itself seemed suspended in time, its groans and creaks long silenced by the cold. May Straker had found refuge inside, curling on a pile of grain sacks, its ears twitching to every faint sound of shifting ice outside. Captain Brooks passed by on the frozen riverbank, lantern swinging, watching the faint glint of the ice-covered wheel. The river beneath was silent yet alive, and he felt the subtle vibration of hidden currents that ran beneath the frozen surface. The world seemed to hold its breath, every sound wind, creaking wood, distant footsteps magnified in the hush of winter. As night fell, the mill stood quietly against the fading light, a frozen sentinel on the river's edge. The town, the river, and even the hidden life beneath the ice seemed to pause together, holding a fragile rhythm of patience and endurance. And, in that silence, the ice-bound mill became more than a building. It was a symbol of persistence, of life quietly enduring, even under the heaviest frost. Though the cold pressed heavily upon the town, Cairo's small market persisted, a muted bustle amid the frozen streets. Vendors wrapped in thick coats and scarves huddled behind stalls, their breath visible in the frigid air. Fruits and vegetables were scarce, but roots and preserved goods lined the tables, and a smell of warm bread and roasting coffee drifted faintly through the streets. Children clutched mittens and small bundles of coins, their eyes wide at the offerings, while adults moved slowly, deliberate in each step, examining the goods, bartering carefully. The snow crunched underfoot, mingling with the soft creak of wooden carts and the occasional clatter of a tin or ceramic jar. Even the wind, though icy, carried faint, comforting scents from the market stalls into the surrounding streets. Mrs. Turner had brought a basket to gather small supplies for her guests. Hovering among the vendors with careful steps, lantern in hand, she smiled at familiar faces, exchanging quiet greetings. Everyone seemed to share an unspoken understanding the cold was merciless. Yet life, small and persistent, continued. Captain Brooks paused at a stall selling smoked meats and dried fish. The vendor, a weathered man with frost on his beard, handed him a small piece wrapped carefully in paper. "Keep your fire strong," he said softly. Brooks nodded, the warmth of human kindness feeling heavier than the thickest coat against the chill. As afternoon faded into dusk, the market slowly emptied. Stalls were shuttered, lanterns dimmed, and the town quieted once more under the muted winter sky. The snow-covered streets reflected the faint glow of remaining lights, and in that soft, lingering calm, the people of Cairo carried their goods home, hearts warmed by small comforts, readying themselves for another long night in the deep cold. Beyond the town, a narrow path wound through the frozen orchard, lined with trees stiff and glittering under their icy coating. The ground was soft in some places and packed in others, snow crunching under each careful step. The orchard was quiet, the only sounds the occasional whisper of wind brushing through the frost-covered branches, sending tiny crystals scattering like faint sparks in the pale light. Father Thompson led his children along the path, checking each tree and shrub for damage from the relentless cold. Icicles hung from low branches, swaying gently, and the faint sun caught them in glimmers of soft light. Emily pressed a gloved hand to the trunk of a tree, marveling at the smooth frost that had formed, as though the orchard had been frozen into a moment of perfect stillness. Animals moved cautiously among the trees. Chickens huddled beneath low branches, their feathers fluffed against the chill, while goats grazed slowly, careful with every bite of frozen grass. Even the wind seemed to move differently here, softer, more deliberate, as though it respected the stillness of the orchard. Mother Thompson carried a basket of water and food for the animals, each movement slow and deliberate to conserve warmth and strength. The quiet of the orchard felt different from the town, deeper, more expansive, filled with subtle sounds: the creak of frozen wood, the faint crackle of ice beneath the snow, and the distant groan of the river. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the orchard shimmered in soft twilight. The family retraced their steps along the frozen path, leaving behind small footprints that the wind would soon erase. And in that fading light, the frozen orchard felt like a secret world, a delicate testament to patience and endurance in the face of winter's unyielding grip. As night fell, lanterns flickered to life along the streets of Cairo, casting soft golden pools of light onto the snow-covered paths. The glow reflected off icy rooftops and frost-lined windows, creating a gentle shimmer that made the town appear as if it were suspended in a dream. The cold was ever present, but the lanterns offered a fragile sense of warmth and security in the dark, quiet evening. Mrs. Turner moved from room to room in her boarding house, lighting small lamps and checking fires. The guests stirred, some wrapping themselves tighter in blankets, others sipping hot tea, each moment steeped in quiet comfort. Outside, the wind whispered through the streets, carrying a faint scent of burning wood and the crisp tang of snow. Children peeked through frost-laden windows, gazing at the soft glow of lanterns and imagining tiny worlds within the shimmering light. Their eyes reflected curiosity and wonder, a gentle spark against the gray night. Adults moved carefully along the streets, boots crunching softly, carrying baskets or lanterns, voices low in conversation, blending with the subtle hum of the town's quiet rhythm. Captain Brooks walked along the frozen riverbank, lantern in hand, watching the dim reflection on the icy surface. The river was still, yet beneath it, hidden currents whispered a subdued, constant energy. He paused occasionally, listening to the faint groan of shifting ice, the soft crackle of frost, and the distant murmur of the town settling into night. The lantern minus its treats exuded a calm resilience, a gentle pulse of life against the cold. In that quiet, illuminated world, Cairo seemed suspended in time, a place where warmth, patience, and human care persisted, softly glowing amid the relentless grip of winter. Along the frozen banks of the Mississippi, I stretched in wide sheets, jagged in places, smooth in others, catching the faint light and scattering it in silvery glimmers. The river, though silent and still on the surface, seemed alive beneath the ice, carrying the subtle pulse of currents and hidden movement that no snow could hide. Captain Brooks walked slowly along the bank, boots crunching against frozen mud and snow. He paused often, lantern held high, watching the delicate frost patterns along the edges of the ice. Each crystal seemed etched with its own story, intricate and fleeting, sparkling for just a moment before fading into the vast expanse of frozen water. Nearby, children ventured close, peeking over the river's edge, fascinated by the glassy surface and the faint sounds of shifting ice. Their laughter was muffled by scarves, but it carried faintly across the bank, a soft warmth against the cold silence. Occasionally, A dog would bound through the snow, scattering frost in arcs that caught the lantern light like tiny diamonds. Horses and cattle moved slowly along the fields beyond the bank, their breaths rising in soft clouds. Farmers checked fences and paths, each gesture deliberate, each movement careful to conserve strength and warmth. Even in the stillness, life continued, patient, persistent, adapting to the frozen grip of winter. As dusk settled, the riverbank glimmered in the soft, fading light. The snow-covered plains beyond merged seamlessly with the gray sky, and the frozen river reflected the town's lanterns in faint, wavering streaks. In that quiet expanse, there was both beauty and a gentle reminder. Even in the harshest cold, life endured quietly, patiently, with hope shimmering faintly across the ice. On the outskirts of Cairo, the old wooden barn stood quiet, its roof thick with snow and icicles dangling like delicate ornaments along the eaves. Inside, the animals huddled together for warmth, their soft breaths rising in invisible clouds that mingled with the faint scent of high-on earth. Every sound, the shifting of hooves, the low murmur of a cow, the scrape of a goat's hoof, was amplified in the hushed, frozen space. Mr. Thompson moved carefully through the barn, carrying a bucket of water, tapping lightly to break the frozen crust before offering it to the animals. Each gesture was deliberate, a measured dance against the unyielding cold. He paused to smooth the horse's frosted mane, feeling the warmth beneath the thick coat, and marveling at the resilience of life, even in the harshest conditions. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, scattering loose snow in gentle spirals. The gray sky above seemed endless, a muted canvas over the frozen landscape. The barn's wooden walls creaked softly under the weight of snow, a sound both reassuring and fragile in the quiet night. Inside, the animals shifted slightly, pressing closer for warmth, creating a gentle rhythm of life amidst the stillness. Mr. Thompson settled nearby, leaning against a support beam, feeling the soft warmth of the animals and the faint comfort of routine. Even in the deep freeze, small acts of care and persistence brought solace, a quiet proof that life could endure in the grip of winter. As night deepened, the barn remained a sanctuary, a warm, living heart in a world otherwise held rigid by frost. Outside, the snow sparkled faintly under the moon, and the wind carried whispers across the plains, a lullaby of endurance and quiet hope. Late that night, the sky above Cairo cleared just enough to reveal a scattering of stars, faint but steady, against the deep, dark winter expanse. Each twinkle shimmered softly, reflected in the ice and snow below, turning rooftops, streets, and frozen fields into a delicate mirror of the heavens. The cold pressed against the town, sharp and unrelenting, but the quiet brilliance of the stars offered a gentle, calming contrast. As Turner paused by a frost-covered window in her boarding house, pressing a gloved hand against the glass. The stars seemed impossibly distant, yet their light carried warmth in its own subtle way, a silent companion to the weary town. Inside, her guests huddled near the hearth, listening to the soft crackle of flames, while their eyes occasionally drifted upward toward the night sky. A frozen river. Captain Brooks adjusted the lantern at his side, marveling at the way the ice shimmered under the starlight. The distant groan of the frozen river beneath his feet reminded him of the hidden life moving slowly beneath the surface. Even in stillness, there was a rhythm, a gentle heartbeat that echoed faintly in the cold night air. Out in the orchards and fields, the frost-laden branches and snowdrift caught the starlight in delicate patterns. Every crystal seemed to sparkle with its own inner glow, and the wind whispered softly, moving snow and ice in small, graceful arcs. The town, quiet and hushed, felt suspended between earth and sky, held in a moment of fragile beauty. As the night deepened, the stars remained constant and patient, watching over the frozen town. In that soft, luminous calm, the people of Cairo felt a quiet reassurance. Even in the harshest winter, beauty endured, hope glimmered, and life moved steadily forward, one deliberate breath at a time. When morning arrived, the town of Cairo awoke beneath a world transformed. Every surface, roof, street, fence, and branch was glazed in frost, glittering faintly as the first weak light of day touched the snow. The air was crisp and sharp, each breath a visible swirl, carrying the quiet promise of a day to be met with care and patience. Turner moved through her boarding house, checking fires and preparing warm tea. The small comforts, the flicker of flames, the steam rising from cups, the weight of thick blankets felt monumental against the relentless cold. Death stirred slowly, rubbing their hands together, pressing fingers against cheeks, savoring the gentle warmth that resisted the chill seeping through windows and doors. Along the streets, the townsfolk began their careful routines. Boots crunched over icy snow, lanterns glowed faintly against frosted windows, and the soft scrape of shovels sounded through the quiet morning. Children, cheeks rosy and scarves tight, ventured briefly outside, dragging sleds or tracing small patterns in the snow, their joy muted but persistent. Captain Brooks walked along the riverbank, lantern swinging gently, admiring the frost patterns on the ice. Frozen river reflected the pale light of morning, a soft silver mirror stretching into the distance. Beneath the ice, he knew the currents moved quietly, patiently, as if waiting for the thaw that might come long after the snow and frost had faded. By midday, the frost held its delicate grip, sparkling faintly on every surface. The town moved slowly, carefully, yet steadily, finding rhythm in the cold. Each warm hearth, each shared meal, each deliberate step through snow was a quiet victory, a testament to life continuing fragile but unbroken in the icy hold of winter. The main road leading out of Cairo was nearly unrecognizable beneath layers of snow and ice. Deep ruts were hidden under powdery drifts, and every step required caution. The cold made the frozen path brittle, each footfall sending small cracks, running like veins across the surface, accompanied by a faint hollow echo that carried far in the quiet morning air. Mrs. Turner wrapped a thick scarf around her and Ekin stepped outside with a lantern, moving slowly to check the path leading to her boarding house. The light reflected off icy ridges, revealing subtle textures in the snow, each gleam a delicate interplay of shadow and frost. She paused often, listening to the soft groans of ice beneath her feet, feeling the rhythm of the frozen world beneath her boots. Along the road, a few townsfolk moved deliberately, bundles of firewood or baskets balanced carefully in their arms. Children, watching from windows, imagined the hidden adventure in the ice-minus cracked path, their breath forming tiny clouds as they whispered excitedly to one another. Even the stray animals treaded carefully, paws slipping slightly on patches of glossy ice, their movements deliberate and measured. Captain Brooks inspected the road near the river crossing, lantern casting a warm glow over the frozen expanse. He noted every subtle fracture in the ice, aware of the hidden dangers beneath. The frozen river hummed faintly beneath the surface, the current trapped but alive, and he felt the delicate balance between caution and persistence that winter demanded. As evening approached, the ice-minus cracked road gleamed under the soft light of lanterns, silent and majestic. The town, moving slowly along its length, felt both vulnerable and resilient. Every careful step, every deliberate motion, was a quiet testament to endurance, a steady heartbeat within the frozen embrace of the cold snap of 1899. Along the edge of the Thompson orchard, the wooden fence lay under a thick coat of frost, each post and rail encased in a delicate shell of ice that glittered in the pale winter sunlight. The fence groaned faintly under the weight of ice, sending tiny shards clinking softly to the snow below, a gentle metallic lullaby for the quiet orchard. Father Thompson moved along the line, hammer and tools in hand, tapping gently on the icy rails to check for weak points. Each movement was careful, deliberate, measured against the cold and the fragile structure beneath his gloves. Every small success, a tightened post, a repaired rail felt like a victory over the relentless winter, a reminder that life persisted in careful effort. The children railed behind, marveling at the frost-minus covered patterns that adorned every piece of wood. Emily reached out to touch an icicle dangling from a rail, letting it melt slowly on Hermit and Ned's hand, fascinated by the way the ice refracted the faint light. Little Samuel stamped carefully along the snowy path, leaving small footprints that the wind would soon erase. Even the animals respected the frozen fence. Chickens huddled near the posts, goats brushed against the rails for warmth, and horses pawed gently at the snow, the crisp sound echoing softly through the orchard. Every movement felt measured, a dance of survival and patience in the icy stillness. As the day faded toward evening, the fence sparkled in the last pale light, a quiet barrier and a shimmering testament to persistence. The orchard, frozen and still, held the memory of warmth and life within its boundaries, a gentle reminder that even in the deepest cold, hope and care endured. As twilight settled over Cairo, thin trails of smoke began to rise from every chimney, curling lazily into the still gray sky. The scent of burning wooden coal mingled with the crisp, icy air, creating a comforting aroma that drifted across streets and fields, carrying hints of warmth into the frozen town. Mrs. Turner moved carefully along the hallways of her boarding house, checking fires and stoking embers. Guests stirred from their quiet naps, stretching beneath thick blankets, their faces flushed with warmth. The soft glow from hearths and lanterns cast long shadows on frost-lined walls, turning the rooms into cozy sanctuaries against the harsh winter beyond. Along the streets, townsfolk paused to watch the smoke rise, lanterns flickering in hand, the quiet of evening deepening around them. Children pressed gloved hands to windows, following the dance of the smoke as it rose and disappeared into the fading light. Even the stray animals seemed to sense the calm, moving quietly, settling into small nooks where warmth lingered. Captain Brooks stood at the riverbank, watching the lanterns and smoke of the town reflected on the frozen surface. The ice shimmered faintly, and he could sense the hidden movement of the river beneath, subtle and persistent. The smoke carried stories of human care, of small acts of warmth, connecting each home with an invisible thread of life and endurance. As night deepened, the smoke continued to drift, a soft, unbroken ribbon weaving through the frozen town. The scent of fire, the muted glow of lanterns, and the hush of the snow created a serene rhythm. In that gentle embrace, Cairo rested quietly, held together by warmth, patience, and the enduring pulse of life in the heart of winter. Night had fully settled over Cairo, and the streets lay silent beneath a smooth layer of snow. Footsteps were rare, and each one echoed softly, leaving a fleeting impression before the wind swept it away. The town seemed paused, a delicate balance between stillness and the quiet, persistent life within its homes. Mrs. Turner made a final round through the boarding house, checking fires and ensuring everyone was tucked under warm blankets. The soft crackle of embers in the hearth mingled with the occasional muffled cough or shifting of a guest, creating a subtle rhythm that filled the stillness with gentle life. Lanterns glowed softly along hallways, casting pools of golden light on frost-laden floors. Along the streets, a few late wanderers moved slowly, lanterns swinging, boots crunching gently against the packed snow. The wind was a soft whisper, brushing against windows and rooftops, lifting light flurries that twirled in faint, ghostly arcs. Every sound was shifting. Distant laughter, a soft bark was amplified in the hushed world, but none felt harsh. Each was part of the quiet symphony of winter. Captain Brooks leaned against the railing of the Silver Bell, lantern in hand, watching the ice-glazed river reflect the soft glow of the town. Beneath the frozen surface, he could sense the slow, patient currents, hidden yet steady, a reminder that life endured even in the stillest places. As the night deepened, the quiet streets shimmered faintly under the soft glow of lanterns and starlight. Every home, every hearth, every careful step in the snow was a testament to endurance, warmth, and quiet hope. In that gentle embrace, the town of Cairo rested, held tenderly in winter's frozen grip, yet alive in every small heartbeat within its silent streets. The old iron bridge connecting Cairo to the opposite shore glistened under the soft moonlight, every railing beam encased in frost. Tiny icicles hung like delicate ornaments, swaying faintly in the gentle wind. The bridge groaned softly under the weight of ice, the sound echoing across the frozen river below. Captain Brooks moved carefully along the bridge, lantern held high, boots crunching lightly on the snow-covered boards. Each step required attention, each motion deliberate as he inspected the frost-covered rails for weak spots. The cold nipped at his cheeks, but the soft glow of the lantern offered a small comfort, a warm companion in the otherwise icy world. From the town, lantern lights spilled onto the bridge, reflecting in the frozen river and illuminating the intricate frost patterns on the iron. A few late wanderers crossed cautiously, boots crunching, hands buried deep in pockets, heads bent against the wind. Their muted voices carried faintly across the ice, adding warmth to the still night. The river beneath, though frozen, seemed alive, faint groans and subtle shifts betraying its hidden currents. Captain Brooks paused to listen, feeling the pulse of water trapped beneath the ice, a reminder that life persisted quietly, even under winter's relentless grip. As he reached the midpoint of the bridge, the world seemed suspended between ice, snow, and the soft lantern glow. The frosted rails shimmered like crystal, and the wind whispered softly around him. The bridge, silent yet steadfast, became a symbol of endurance, linking town to wilderness, warmth to cold, and reminding every observer of the quiet persistence of life through the harshest of winters. At the heart of Cairo, the small wooden church stood quietly beneath a thick blanket of snow. Its steeple rose stiff and frosted against the darkening sky, and the faint glow of candlelight from the windows offered a gentle warmth to the frozen town. The sound of wind against the building was softened by the snow, making the church feel like a sanctuary, suspended in winter's stillness. Inside, a few townsfolk gathered for evening prayer, their voices low and soothing, blending with the soft crackle of a small stove burning in the corner. The scent of waxed candles mingled with the faint tang of burning wood, creating a comforting atmosphere that contrasted with the icy chill outside. Each word, each pause seemed amplified in the quiet space, carrying a sense of calm and reflection. Children sat close to their parents, eyes wide with wonder, as they traced frost patterns along the window panes with gloved fingers. The pews creaked softly under careful movement, a reminder of the age and resilience of the structure itself. Even the faint gusts of wind that slipped through cracks in the wooden walls seemed gentle in comparison to the warmth and rhythm of the people gathered inside. Captain Brooks paused briefly outside the church, lantern raised, observing the glow spilling from the windows onto the snow. The frozen streets, the glimmering rooftops, and the silent river reflected faintly in the pale light, creating a sense of connection between the town, its people, and the enduring winter landscape. As night deepened, the church remained a beacon of warmth and quiet reflection, a reminder that even amid frost and snow, moments of peace, hope, and community persisted. The town, held gently in winter's grasp, found solace in these small, luminous spaces where life and warmth endured against the cold. Behind the Thompson home, the garden gate was encrusted with frost, each hinge stiff with ice, each wooden plank gleaming in the pale light of the winter morning. Snow had drifted against it overnight, forming gentle mounds that hid the path beyond, yet the gate still stood firm, a quiet sentinel to the life and routines within the yard. Father Thompson moved carefully to unfasten the latch, fingers numb despite thick gloves. Each motion required patience. The ice resisted, cracking softly under pressure. Beyond the gate, the garden lay blanketed in white, the frozen plants and shrubs bending slightly beneath their icy coats. Every branch and stem glittered faintly, a crystalline reminder of the harsh season. The children lingered nearby, their eyes wide with fascination. Emily traced frost patterns on the gate with gloved fingertips, marveling at the delicate, spittery designs that seemed to form a secret language. Little Samuel kicked softly at the snow, sending up small sprays of powder that caught the weak sunlight, sparkling like tiny stars. Even the animals paused, respecting the quiet majesty of the garden. Chickens huddled close to the edges of frost-minus-covered shrubs, while goats rubbed gently against the wooden posts. The faint whisper of wind moved through the yard, stirring light snowflakes that danced slowly in the soft air. As the morning deepened, a frosted gate stood shining in pale light, a threshold between the warmth of home and the frozen world beyond. It was a quiet symbol of endurance, the persistence of life, and the delicate beauty that winter could bring to every corner of the town. Cairo's town square lay silent under a thick blanket of snow. The benches and fountains were coated in frost, icicles dangling from every edge. The lampposts glowed faintly through the morning mist, their warm light reflecting off the snow and creating soft halos that shimmered like faint fireflies in the cold air. The square, usually bustling with life, now held a quiet, serene stillness, a frozen heart at the center of the town. Mrs. Turner stepped cautiously across the square, lantern in hand, checking the paths and making sure they were safe for the few early risers who ventured out. Each step crunched against the packed snow, the sound delicate yet sharp in the hush of the frozen morning. She paused to admire the frost patterns along the lampposts, the swirling ice crystals that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. Children ventured briefly into the square, sleds in hand, laughing softly as they slid over gentle mounds of snow. Their footprints left faint trails, quickly erased by the light dusting that the wind sent swirling across the square. Even animals moved cautiously through the area, paws sinking softly into snow, ears flicking at the distant creak of ice along the river. Captain Brooks watched from the edge of the square, lantern raised, admiring the way the frost and snow transformed familiar streets into a sparkling, magical landscape. The frozen river mirrored the soft light, and the distant groan of ice beneath its surface reminded him of the life that persisted unseen. As the day moved slowly forward, the frozen town square remained a quiet sanctuary, a place where the beauty of winter and the patience of its people were reflected in every snow-laden corner. In that serene space, the pulse of life, gentle yet persistent, continued amid the icy stillness of the cold snap of 1899. Inside the homes of Cairo, windows were coated with a thin, intricate layer of frost, transforming each pane into a miniature landscape of ice crystals. Sunlight or lantern light caught the patterns, sending delicate reflections across walls, floors, and furniture. Each swirling feather of frost seemed unique, a fleeting masterpiece created by winter's quiet hand. Sis Turner paused at her own window, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, marveling at the tiny frozen forests etched into the glass. Outside, the snow-covered streets glimmered in the soft morning light, lanterns casting pools of warmth that contrasted with the crystalline chill beyond. The quiet was profound, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of frost-laden wood. Children pressed their faces to frosted panes, tracing designs with mitten-clad fingers, their breaths fogging the glass. Emily imagined far-off lands hidden within the icy patterns, while Samuel tapped gently at the frost, sending faint glittering fragments onto the sill. Their wonder was quiet, gentle, a slow rhythm in the hush of winter. Even the animals noticed the frost-laden windows, their eyes catching the shimmer of light and shadow. Cats curled near the warm hearth, occasionally glancing at the glass, while dogs lay patiently beside their owners, noses twitching at the faint scent of snow drifting in through tiny cracks. As the day progressed, the icy window panes remained a quiet spectacle, delicate and ever-changing. They reminded the townsfolk that beauty could exist even in the harshest cold, that life persisted, and that moments of wonder and peace could be found in the simplest observations, like frost dancing on glass in the heart of winter. The small wooden bridge spanning the creek on the edge of town was buried under a thick layer of snow, its railings coated in frost that shimmered faintly in the pale light. The boards groaned softly under the weight, and each step released a gentle crunch that echoed in the quiet, frozen air. The bridge seemed fragile, delicate, yet steadfast, a quiet passage over the icy water below. Captain Brooks walked slowly across, lantern held high, eyes tracing the intricate frost patterns along the railings. The creek beneath was frozen solid, its surface reflecting the weak sunlight in soft, shifting silver. Occasionally, the ice groaned faintly, a reminder of the currents trapped underneath, moving with patient persistence despite the winter's hold. Children played nearby, cautiously sliding along small snowdrifts that had formed against the bridge. Their laughter was muffled but bright, carrying lightly through the cold morning air. Emily knelt to scoop a handful of sparkling snow, letting it scatter like tiny stars across the frozen path, while Samuel pressed his mitten to the icy rail, tracing delicate lines along its frost-covered surface. Farmers and townsfolk moved deliberately, carrying bundles of wood or supplies across the bridge, careful not to slip. Each step was measured day, silent rhythm of resilience and care, reinforcing the quiet understanding that winter demanded patience and attentiveness in every action. As the day deepened, the snow-laden bridge stood silently, a fragile but enduring link between frozen banks. The wind whispered softly through the frosted trees, and the frozen creek mirrored the sky, pale and calm. In that serene stillness, The bridge became more than a crossing. It was a quiet testament to life enduring, connecting, and persisting in the soft, relentless grip of winter. The Thompson barnyard was blanketed in thick snow, every fence post and tool coated with a glistening layer of frost. Footprints crisscrossed the soft white surface, marking the careful movements of animals and humans alike. The air was crisp and biting, carrying the faint scent of hay, warm breath, and the frozen earth beneath. Father Thompson moved slowly among the livestock, checking on each animal with deliberate care. Horses nuzzled close to each other, their frosted coats brushing gently, while cows huddled together in the corner of the barnyard, eyes calm and patient. The goats rubbed against frost-covered posts, stamping gently at the snow, creating a subtle rhythmic sound that blended with the soft crunch of boots on ice. Children followed behind, tiny mittens brushing snow from low branches, eyes wide at the sparkling frost. Melanie picked up a small icicle, examining the way the sunlight fragmented through it, while Samuel carefully stacked small bits of firewood, learning the quiet, steady work that winter demanded. Even the barn doors creaked softly under the weight of ice, adding a gentle musical undertone to the barnyard's frozen rhythm. The wind moved softly through gaps in fences, stirring snow in slow, lazy arcs, and every small sound was magnified in the hush of the winter landscape. As evening approached, the barnyard shimmered in the pale glow of the fading sun. The animals settled closer. Humans moved deliberately toward warmth, and the frost-covered world held them gently in its quiet embrace. Life persisted here, steady and patient, each small gesture a testament to endurance, care, and the unspoken rhythm of winter. The small creek winding through the outskirts of Cairo was encased in ice, its once babbling waters now trapped beneath a smooth, glimmering surface. Snow clung to the banks, forming gentle drifts that softened the landscape, while the occasional frozen reed or twig jutted out, glistening like glass in the weak sunlight. Captain Brooks walked along the edge of the creek, lantern swinging gently, boots crunching softly on the packed snow. He tapped the ice lightly with a stick, listening to the faint, hollow echo beneath, a subtle reminder of the life moving quietly beneath the frozen surface. The creek seemed both still and alive, a fragile balance held by winter's icy hand. Children stood nearby, their mittens brushing against snow-covered rocks, watching tiny patches of water that remained unfrozen ripple faintly beneath the ice. Emily traced the outlines of frost on reeds, while Samuel tossed small stones carefully onto the surface, marveling at the delicate cracks they left behind. Even the smallest action seemed significant in the hushed, frozen world. Farmers crossed the creek cautiously, stepping only on the most solid patches, carrying supplies for livestock or wood for the fire. Each movement was slow, deliberate, measured against the hidden danger beneath. The faint groan of shifting ice joined the whisper of wind, creating a quiet, rhythmic lullaby across the frozen landscape. As the sun dipped low, the frozen creek reflected the pale winter sky, soft and silver. The world seemed suspended in a delicate, quiet balance, each snowflake, icicle, and frozen current a testament to patience, endurance, and the subtle beauty that life could find even in the heart of the cold snap of 1899. As night approached, the rooftops of Cairo were transformed into a glittering landscape of frost and snow. Every shingle, every chimney cap, and every ridge was coated in a delicate layer of ice, catching the pale light of lanterns and the fading sun. The town, from above, looked like a miniature winter kingdom, silent and suspended in a frozen moment. Mrs. Turner stood at her attic window, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, marveling at the soft, glimmering beauty. Smoke from chimneys curled upward, dissipating into the cold air, weaving invisible threads between homes, a quiet sign of warmth and life below. Each house held its own small hearth, its own glowing heart against the relentless winter. Children pressed faces to frosted windows, pointing out shapes in the snow-covered rooftops, tiny castles, dragons, and mountains born from imagination. Emily traced delicate frost patterns with her gloved finger, and Samuel carefully tapped at a small icicle dangling from the eave, watching it twinkle before melting against his mitten. From the riverbank, Captain Brooks looked toward the rooftops, lantern in hand. The frozen streets below reflected the soft glow of lights, and he could sense the rhythm of life continuing in every warm window, every careful step on icy roads, and every hearth crackling quietly inside the homes. As night fully settled, the frost-covered rooftops shimmered under the starry sky. The town held together in patient endurance, each home a small beacon of warmth and care. Life persisted, gentle and steady, in the embrace of winter's quiet beauty, reminding all who looked that even in the harshest cold, hope and warmth endured. Late at night, a soft wind drifted through Cairo, brushing across snow-covered streets and frost-laden rooftops. It whispered gently through the trees, causing icicles to sway faintly and sending loose snowflakes twirling in slow, graceful arcs. The wind carried a subtle chill, but also a quiet music, a lullaby that wrapped the town in a serene, soothing rhythm. Mrs. Turner checked the last of her guests, ensuring fires burned steadily and blankets were tucked tightly. She paused at the window to watch the wind play across the snow, the lanterns casting gentle shadows that danced along walls and paths. Inside, the soft crackle of flames harmonized with the faint hiss of the cold outside, creating a peaceful, meditative soundscape. Children slept soundly, bundled beneath thick quilts, dreaming quietly as the wind whispered against the frost-covered panes. Even the animals seemed to rest more deeply, their breaths rising in small clouds, blending with the soft white silence of the snow-covered world. Captain Brooks, standing on the frozen riverbank, felt the wind brush across his face, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and wood smoke. He watched the reflection of lanterns and stars on the ice, noting how the subtle currents beneath the frozen surface seemed to pulse in quiet agreement with the gentle night. As the town slept, the night wind continued its tender passage, moving softly over rooftops, fields, and rivers. It was a calm, persistent presence, a reminder that even in the deepest cold, there was beauty, serenity, and quiet life. Wrapped in the embrace of the wind and the frost, Cairo rested, ready to greet another day of winter's delicate entrance. The stillness of midnight, lanterns glowed faintly in windows and along the quiet streets of Cairo, their soft light refracted by frost and snow. The town seemed suspended between dreams and reality, each flickering flame a gentle heartbeat in the frozen night. The snow muffled every sound so that even the faintest creak of ice or whisper of wind carried a crisp clarity. Mrs. Turner moved through the boarding house one last time, lantern in hand, checking that all guests were comfortable. The warmth of fires and the soft weight of blankets created a comforting cocoon against the icy chill outside. Every small gesture a replenished fire. A carefully tucked blanket felt monumental in the quiet stillness of winter. Outside, the few wanderers left in the streets moved slowly, lanterns held high, boots crunching lightly on the packed snow. Children's laughter from earlier had faded into dreams, replaced by a serene hush that wrapped the town in calm. Frost sparkled faintly under each lantern's glow, painting delicate patterns that seemed to dance in the quiet air. Captain Brooks paused on the frozen riverbank, lantern swinging gently, observing the reflections of the town's lights on the ice. The river, frozen and silent above, still carried the slow pulse of currents beneath, a quiet reminder that life persisted. Even when all seemed still, the soft wind teased the edges of snowdrifts, moving flakes in gentle arcs that sparkled under the lantern light. As midnight deepened, the lanterns remained steadfast, glowing quietly in the heart of winter. Tira rested beneath their warm, gentle light, life moving slowly, patiently, and with enduring hope. In the hush of the frozen night, the town was cradled by warmth, patience, and the quiet persistence of all who lived within it. An narrow path leading from the town toward the outskirts lay completely snowbound, each step leaving a small indentation in the soft white blanket. The wind had sculpted the snow into gentle ridges and curves, creating a quiet, undulating landscape that glimmered faintly in the lantern light. The path seemed almost magical, a delicate passage through the still, frozen world. Mrs. Turner moved slowly along the trail, carrying a small lantern, careful not to slip on hidden ice beneath the snow. Each movement required attention and patience, but there was a quiet pleasure in the rhythm of deliberate steps, the soft crunch beneath her boots blending with the muted whisper of the wind. Children had briefly ventured here earlier in the day, sledding over gentle slopes, leaving faint tracks that were now partially obscured by drifting snow. Emily's small handprints could still be traced along a low snowbank, while Samuel's careful imprints showed where he had tried to balance a small pile of snow into a miniature fort. The traces of their play were quiet memories etched into the snow, delicate reminders of life and warmth amidst the cold. Captain Brooks walked along the edge of the path, lantern in hand, observing the frozen creek running parallel to it. The ice shimmered faintly, reflecting the lantern's glow, and beneath the surface, he could feel the subtle pulse of currents, a reminder that even frozen, the river was alive. As evening settled, the snowbound path glimmered under the soft light, each ridge and curve a gentle invitation to move slowly and thoughtfully. The quiet, deliberate journey along the trail became a meditation on patience, endurance, and the fragile beauty of life persisting in the frozen embrace of winter. The rows of the Thompson orchard were lined with trees heavy with frost, their branches bowed under the weight of snow. Every twig and leaf shimmered in the soft morning light, creating a delicate lattice of ice that sparkled like countless tiny diamonds. The orchard was silent, save for the occasional whisper of wind and the faint crunch of snow beneath careful boots. Father Thompson moved slowly through the orchard, checking each tree for damage and gently brushing snow from the lower branches. Each motion was deliberate, a quiet ritual of care and patience. The frozen apples, still clinging stubbornly to the branches, reflected the faint sunlight, glowing like small orbs of amber amidst the frost. The children followed at a safe distance, marveling at the glittering landscape. Emily pressed her mitten-clad hands against a branch, feeling the icy texture, while Samuel carefully scooped up a patch of snow, letting it trickle slowly through his fingers, even in the stillness of winter. Their curiosity and wonder created a gentle rhythm within the orchard. Animals moved cautiously among the rows. Chickens huddled near the trunks, goats brushed gently against frost-covered posts, and horses pawed softly at the snow. Every small sound, the shuffle of hooves, the ruffle of feathers added to the quiet, measured music of life continuing amidst winter's grip. As the day wore on, the icy orchard rose glimmered softly, the frost reflecting light in subtle, shifting patterns. The orchard felt both frozen and alive, a delicate balance between stillness and the gentle persistence of life. Each careful step, each deliberate movement reminded those who walked there that even in the harshest cold, care, patience, and quiet endurance flourished. Beyond the orchard, a wide meadow stretched under a thick, unbroken blanket of snow. The surface was smooth and pale, occasionally interrupted by the delicate imprint of animal tracks or the faint glimmer of a frost-covered shrub. The cold was absolute, yet there was a serene beauty in the stillness, a quiet rhythm that moved slowly beneath the pale winter sky. Captain Brooks walked along the edge of the meadow, boots crunching gently in the snow. He paused often, observing the way the wind had shaped drifts into soft curves and small ridges. The frozen grasses poked through in places, their tips glistening like tiny stars under the soft light. Each breath, he took rose in a visible cloud, lingering for a moment before fading into the crisp air. Children had wandered here earlier, leaving faint trails that now shimmered under frost. Emily had made careful snowballs, arranging them in small patterns like tiny frozen sculptures, while Samuel had traced a slow path with his footprints, creating a quiet map across the pale landscape. Even the smallest actions left marks of warmth and life in the otherwise frozen world. Animals moved cautiously along the edges of the meadow, pawing at patches of ice and sniffing at hidden forage. Their movements were deliberate, careful, but persistent, a quiet testament to endurance in a harsh and unyielding environment. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the frozen meadow glowed softly, reflecting the pale light and the quiet beauty of the winter day. The world seemed suspended in gentle stillness, a reminder that even in deep cold, life continued patiently, deliberately, and with subtle grace, waiting for the warmth that would one day return. Inside the Thompson home, the hearth glowed warmly, its flames casting gentle shadows across the frost-lined walls. The scent of burning wood mingled with the faint aroma of simmering stew, creating a cocoon of comfort against the relentless cold outside. Every crackle of the fire added a soft, soothing rhythm to the room, like a quiet heartbeat in the frozen world. Mrs. Turner moved quietly among the guests, offering cups of warm tea and checking that blankets were tucked snugly around shoulders. The soft murmurs of conversation blended with the fire's hiss, filling the space with a calm, measured energy that contrasted sharply with the icy winds outside. Every small gesture a replenished flame. A gently passed mug felt monumental in the stillness of winter. Children curled near the hearth, cheeks rosy and eyes wide with wonder as they watched sparks rise and fade. Emily traced the glow with her fingertips, captivated by the way light seemed to dance and shimmer, while Samuel leaned against a chair, listening to the faint pop of wood splitting in the fire. Even the animals found warmth nearby, settling into cozy nooks and letting their breaths rise in gentle clouds. Captain Brooks sat quietly, watching the fire and the play of shadows across the room. He felt a deep sense of reassurance in the warmth, in the small, deliberate acts of care that defined life during the cold snap. Outside, snow drifted softly against the windows, glittering faintly. But inside, the hearthside calm held the world in gentle balance. As night deepened, the room glowed softly, a sanctuary of warmth and quiet, where patience, endurance, and care wove an unspoken tapestry. In the hush of the hearth, life moved deliberately and gently, a quiet pulse amidst the frozen hold of winter. Under the pale glow of the winter moon, the fields surrounding Cairo shimmered with frost and snow. Every blade of grass and every low shrub glistened like glass, reflecting the soft, silvery light. Snow was smooth and unbroken in many places, interrupted only by the faint tracks of animals and the distant footprints of careful wanderers. Captain Brooks walked slowly along the edge of the fields, lantern held low to guide his steps. The cold air was crisp and still, carrying faint whispers of wind that stirred the snow in gentle arcs. Each exhaled breath rose in a small, glowing cloud, dissipating softly into the night. The world seemed suspended between earth and sky, quiet and serene, yet alive with subtle motion beneath the frozen surface. Emily and Samuel had wandered here briefly in the afternoon, leaving tiny handprints and snowball trails that now sparkled faintly in the moonlight. Even in winter stillness, traces of life remained, delicate markers of warmth and movement in the frozen landscape. The occasional rustle of a rabbit, or the soft shuffle of a fox reminded all who observed that life continued quietly, patiently beneath the icy blanket. The townsfolk, tucked safely within homes, could see the glow of moonlight reflecting off snow-laden rooftops and distant hills. Lanterns flickered faintly in windows, adding warm highlights to the cold, luminous world outside. Every flicker of light, every gentle shadow told a story of endurance, care, and hope. As the night deepened, the moonlit fields held their quiet majesty, serene and steadfast. Life persisted here in small, deliberate ways, and the frozen world seemed to breathe gently, inviting those who watched to move slowly, think softly, and rest peacefully beneath winter's tranquil embrace. At a gentle bend in the Mississippi, the river was a mirror of ice and snow, reflecting the pale glow of the moon and the faint light of distant lanterns. Frost clung to the banks and the branches of overhanging trees, forming delicate crystalline patterns that sparkled with every subtle movement of the wind. The frozen river seemed both still and alive, a quiet pulse running beneath the icy surface. Captain Brooks walked along the snow-covered bank, boots crunching softly, lantern held steady. The river hummed faintly beneath the ice, subtle shifts and groans carrying a quiet, persistent rhythm. He paused often, listening to the delicate sounds of moving water trapped beneath its frozen sheet, reminded that even in deep winter, life continued below the surface. Birds had settled silently in nearby trees, their small forms hunched against the cold, and a lone fox batted carefully along a distant path, leaving faint tracks in the snow. Every movement, deliberate and cautious, seemed magnified in the stillness of the night. The wind whispered faintly, stirring snowflakes in gentle spirals across the frozen bend. The town's distant lanterns glimmered along the opposite bank, soft reflections scattered across the ice. Each light, each subtle shimmer spoke of warmth, care, and the persistent rhythm of human life amid winter's icy grip. The river bend, frozen yet alive, held the quiet majesty of patience, endurance, and gentle perseverance. As the night deepened, the frosted riverbed glimmered softly under the moonlight. The world felt suspended in serene stillness, where the ice, snow, and soft wind wove together a gentle lullaby for all who moved slowly and thoughtfully through winter's embrace. As dusk approached, the Thompson orchard lay hushed beneath a heavy layer of snow. The bare trees, their branches coated in frost, stretched silently toward the dimming sky, and the faint glimmer of ice on every twig caught the last hints of daylight. The orchard seemed suspended between stillness and quiet anticipation, a frozen world holding its breath in the waning light. Father Thompson moved carefully along the rows, boots crunching softly against the snow. He paused to brush lightly against a frosted branch, sending tiny crystals drifting into the air. Each movement was deliberate, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of ice and snow. The frozen apples that still clung stubbornly to the trees shimmered faintly, tiny amber lights in the muted landscape. The children lingered nearby, hands tucked deep into pockets, watching the delicate patterns of frost on the branches. Emily traced shapes in the ice with her mitten, marveling at the intricate, ephemeral designs, while Samuel kicked gently at snowdrifts, sending small clouds of powder spiraling into the cold air. Their quiet curiosity brought warmth to the otherwise still orchard. Even the animals moved with care, hens huddling close to tree trunks, goats brushing gently against frost-covered posts, and horses pawing softly at packed snow. Every sound, hoof against snow, feather ruffle, or soft breath was magnified in the hush of the orchard, a subtle symphony of life persisting through winter. As dusk deepened into evening, the silent orchard glimmered softly in the fading light. Life endured here in gentle, measured ways, a delicate testament to patience, quiet perseverance, and the understated beauty of a world held in winter's frozen embrace. A narrow lane, winding between the Thompson orchard and the town, was dusted with soft snow, each step muffled underfoot. Lanterns hung from posts along the path, their warm light cutting gently through the icy air and reflecting off frost-covered branches that arched overhead. The lane glowed faintly, a serene corridor of warmth and calm amidst the frozen landscape. Mrs. Turner walked slowly along the lane, lantern in hand, boots crunching softly in the snow. She paused often, listening to the quiet rhythm of the winter night, the faint groan of ice, the whisper of wind through bare branches, the distant murmur of life from nearby homes. Each sound was magnified in the stillness, yet none felt harsh. All were part of the gentle pulse of the town. Children's earlier footprints traced a faint map along the lane, partially covered by fresh snow. Emily's mitten-clad handprints marked the edges of snow banks, while Samuel's careful prints zigzagged toward a small drift. Even in winter's grip, traces of warmth and life lingered, subtle reminders that the cold could not entirely still human curiosity and joy. Animals padded cautiously along the edges, goats brushing against frosted posts, chickens huddled near fences, and horses stamped softly to keep warm. The lantern light flickered across their coats, highlighting the shimmer of frost and the subtle movement of life persisting in the cold. As the night deepened, the lantern-lit lane became a quiet sanctuary, a place where warmth, patience, and gentle care wove together into a soft rhythm. The snow, the frost, and the tender glow of light created a world both still and alive, a serene passage, reminding all who walked it of life's enduring persistence, even in the harshest winter. By the final hour of night, Cairo lay fully at rest beneath a thick, glittering blanket of snow. The town's rooftops, streets, and riverbanks were softened under frost, each surface catching the pale glow of lanterns and the distant moon. The air was still, crisp, and pure, carrying a gentle hush that seemed to wrap the town in a delicate, protective embrace. Mrs. Turner moved to her boarding house one last time, pausing at windows to admire the quiet, frozen world outside. Fires burned low in hearths, casting a gentle glow over sleeping guests. The fainter aroma of wood smoke mingled with the soft scent of snow drifting in through tiny cracks, creating a comforting, meditative calm. Each blanket tucked, each fire stoked, each small gesture became a quiet act of care, a final note in the night's tender rhythm. The children slept peacefully, dreams mingling with the shimmer of frost on window panes and the soft glint of moonlight on snow. Even the animals seemed to breathe in unison with the stillness, their warmth and life a subtle pulse beneath the frozen landscape. Captain Brooks stood at the edge of the frozen river, lantern in hand, watching the moonlight shimmer across the ice. Beneath the frozen surface, the river moved quietly, patiently, a reminder that life endures even in the harshest winters. The wind whispered softly through trees and across snowdrifts, carrying the serene music of night across the town. In the gentle embrace of the winter night, Cairo rested fully, cradled by frost, snow, and the soft glow of lanterns. Life had persisted, warmth had endured, and hope glimmered quietly in every careful gesture. The cold snap of 1899 held the town in its icy grasp, yet it also revealed the subtle beauty, patience, and resilience that flourished even in the deepest winter. Thank you for joining this journey through the frozen world of Cairo during the great Arctic outbreak of 1899. As the town sleeps under its blankets of snow and frost, let your own mind rest gently, wrapped in the common steady rhythm of winter's quiet embrace. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment to share your thoughts. Whether you are watching from the US, Europe, Canada, or anywhere else around the world, may this serene tale guide you into peaceful rest, carrying warmth and quiet hope into your dreams.